introductions this morning? Thank you, Representative Ballard. Okay, not seeing any bill introductions. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next item, and that is open the hearing on House Bill 2468, which is concerning state of disaster emergencies, appointing the incident commander by the Adjutant General for weather-related disasters, establishing coordinating duties of the Division of Emergency Management, and establishing the Disaster Contingency Fund for use by the State Finance Council to match federal grants and funds to respond to such weather-related disasters. So right now, I will turn it over to Jill Walters, the First Assistant Revisor of the Office of the Revisor of Statutes. Jill?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. House Bill 2468 before you today requires the Adjutant General to appoint an incident commander if the governor has issued a state of disaster emergency related to the threat of an imminent weather-related after such proclamation. So if you think about this, all these policies that we're implementing here would be for weather-related emergencies, not any other kind of emergency. So we're not referring to those today. So if we think about these are weather-related emergency. The Adjutant General will select from persons who head the responsible agencies. They are referred to in the bill as county emergency managers in the counties affected by the weather-related disaster for the purposes of leading the emergency management efforts for the emergency. The incident commander will coordinate with the Kansas Division of Emergency Management to apply for and administer all federal or state emergency grants and other resources related to the weather-related disaster emergency. So during the state of disaster emergency, all county managers in the affected counties would make requests for money and resources. So that would be like supplies, equipment, and materials to the incident commander. The incident commander will collaborate with the Division of Emergency Management to disseminate monies and resources in the affected counties. The Division of Management will lead and coordinate all state resources, working with the State Fire Marshal, the Kansas Forestry Service, and any other state agency necessary to respond to the emergency. And it also specifically provides for if there's a county that would want to volunteer folks to come over and help, that county could do so to help assist and to respond to that emergency. After the state of disaster emergency has been terminated, the Division of Emergency Management will continue to work with the incident commander to continue to apply for and administer monies and federal resources. If requested by the incident commander or the the county emergency manager, the Office of Recovery, or if that doesn't exist anymore, whatever state agency the governor would select, they would work with the affected counties to provide workshops, seminars, and conferences to help assist residents with insurance claims. So to clarify that, they are providing workshops and conferences just to get information out, on how you would assist folks with that. Information to file a claim, and then provide information to residents on county monies, resources, and benefits available for cleanup, repair, and then if there's donated items, there would be like a central location that you could get information for that on. The governor shall ensure that the Office of Recovery coordinates with other state agencies to provide this information and assist the residents of the affected counties. The bill also establishes a disaster contingency fund, and this would be used by the State Finance Council to match grants and funds appropriated under any other federal act or from other resources to address the weather-related disaster. It says on July 1 of 23, we might remember this bill was introduced last year, and so that date, I further explain later, if the bill were to move out of committee, we would want to clarify and change those dates. But that's typical when a bill is introduced in the previous year and we're working it in the next ensuing year, that we would just update the dates. The transfer on that date would be $10 million, and then if any unencumbered balance in the emergency fund was not enough to meet the needs of the next disaster that came along, the State Finance Council could ask for a transfer to the state, from the state general fund to that fund in an amount not to exceed an additional $10 million. And it's capped at any fiscal year, it's capped at that. And I think the reason, I mean, you think it, then the legislature could come back, you as a legislator could come back and act. If more money was needed, then more money could be put. And then it clarifies, just like the State Finance Council has to act, so no money can be made from that without approval of the State Finance Council, so they would have to act for money to be moved out of that fund. The bill clarifies that this is in addition to any other powers and duties related to the State Finance Council concerning the state emergency fund. Because we might recall, this is in addition to the state emergency fund, and the sort of the same parameters apply to that fund. Up to $10 million in a year could be moved over from that in that fund to address other emergencies that happen in the state, other disasters that would happen in the state. These are weather-related emergencies for this. And then finally, the bill amends 2 statutes in the article on the emergency preparedness disaster statutes. One is to clarify that if the proclamation is a weather-related proclamation, the provisions of this bill apply. And then the second one is just in the duties of the Kansas Emergency, or Division of Emergency Management, excuse me, they're to cooperate with the incident commander pursuant to the provisions of the bill. And then it would go into effect on statute book. And I'd be pleased to stand for questions.
All right. Thank you, Jill, for the explanation on House Bill 2468. So the first question I have is in regards to the governor's proclamation of a state of disaster emergency. And the validity of that declaration is for 15 days, and that's in current statute?
Correct.
Oh, so there's nothing in the bill that changes the governor's declaration and altering the days of its validity?
Correct, sir.
Okay. And, all right, Representative Sutton. Question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't want to step on you if you had further questions, however.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, all right, very good. Actually, kind of dovetailing on what you said, this doesn't make any change to the governor's disaster declarations. That's fine. I'm wondering what changes exactly we are making, however. Obviously, I heard your description of the bill, don't get me wrong. But when there's an emergency, don't we already put someone as a point of contact for that emergency? Isn't that pretty standard? We already have the state emergency fund. I'm trying to figure out what is it we're actually doing that's new? How are we addressing, are we addressing something new or in a new way? Or are we just kind of continuing what we're already doing with different titles?
Jill.
This would be an additional fund for weather-related emergencies. So in addition, or excuse me, to address your second question, we would have the other emergency fund at $10 million for any other type of emergency. This is for weather-related disasters. So that is different for this. But in regard, oh, excuse me, because your question.
Well, I'm sorry, I wanted to clarify just that point. The state emergency fund can be used for weather-related too.
Correct, sir.
Okay, so that part's not new.
It's an additional $10 million that weather emergency disasters would have available to them if the State Finance Council chose to act.
Representative, you might wait for my testimony.
Okay, well, by golly. I've received a notion in my head that perhaps I should wait for further testimony. So, Jill, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Thank you very much.
You're brilliant.
Thank you, Mr.
Brilliant.
Chair.
Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we went kind of back and forth with, it sounds like the Adjutant General appoints an incident commander, but then we also reference the county emergency manager. Is there a directive in this bill that if the county has an emergency director, they are then appointed as the incident commander from the Adjutant General? Or does the Adjutant General can just pick whoever he wants to come into that county and be the incident commander?
Jill.
So if there's 5 affected counties, if the proclamation would cover 5 affected counties, the adjutant general would look at the county managers, the county emergency managers in all 5, pick the person who they believe is the most, I'm just going to, most qualified, most up to the job, ready to go. And then that person is the incident commander, and then those other county managers work through the incident commander, and someone is in charge.
Okay, one more question, if I may?
You may.
Thank you very much. So while I recognize that well, I'll wait. Thank you.
Any further questions for Jill? All right, seeing none, thank you, Jill. So the first conferee that we have is Representative Troy Waymaster, and so I'm going to move to the podium and have my testimony. All right, thank you, committee, and I'd like to thank the chairman for allowing me to testify this morning. First, I would like to have a picture up on the screen, because if you recall, 1 year ago, I was not in committee, and exactly at this time, my twin sons were born. So they are turning 1 year old today. And so there they are. That's Chancellor and Charles, and so we're actually going to be having a birthday party for them this weekend to celebrate their first birthday. It's been a distinct honor to actually testify in regards to House Bill 2468, because if you recall, on December 15th, 2021, there was a weather-related event that affected 2 counties in my district. It also affected counties from the representative from Phillips County with the 4-county fire. And I'm glad to have Senator Bowers here today, because 2 days after that event, she and I went to the small town of Paradise, Kansas, population of 50 people, and saw the devastation of the 4-county fire. The first response that we received from everybody, people that I have known my entire life, was, what can the state do? What can the state do to help us? And she and I actually had to say nothing. I mean, the state really doesn't have anything that we didn't know what to tell them. And so we toured the fires that actually were still burning at that time, 2 days later. Saw the dead cattle, the dead livestock, the charred fields, pastures, burnt homes, livelihoods that were totally disrupted by a weather-related event that hopefully never happens again in our lifetime. But when you have 100-mile-per-hour winds and a fire that is burning through, our local firefighters did an amazing job in trying to control the fire and to keep it from burning more homes and devastating more lives. The governor asked both Senator Bowers and myself to serve on the Wildfire Task Force. And this was a task force that was created by legislators, state officials, firefighters, emergency managers, and also those affected. In fact, there's one member on the task force that lost his home. And there was a meeting that we were having in actually Crisis City, Kansas, and we were having a discussion on what the state can do. And this might surprise everybody in this room, but I decided to shut up and listen. And I started then crafting the contents of House Bill 2468 by the comments that were being made by all those on the task force, from the Adjutant General's office, from the State Fire Marshal, the Kansas Forestry Service, the emergency managers, and that individual who actually lost his home. Because one of the things that we learned after the 4-county fire is that there was not a structured, systematic response by the state. And there was a lot of confusion for our constituents, those affected, and there was confusion on exactly what department would actually come in and help and assist. And that's the biggest thing that I want to express. This is the state assisting, not controlling what goes on during a disaster. The locals are in charge. We're not taking away local control, and I will reference that later. The state is going to assist them during the time of the disaster. And so the way it's structured is that when the governor issues a disaster declaration for a weather event, and we said a weather event, so it's not all hazards or all events across the state of Kansas. It's just weather related, because in most cases, that's the only time that the governor issues a declaration, is if there is a weather event. And so this puts the Adjutant General's office and the Kansas Department of Emergency Management as the responsible party of making sure that everything is in place. So if that weather event does occur, we have a point of contact. We have a state responsibility for our constituents to assist them in this disaster. Hopefully, we never get past that step, and the event is not as bad as we might think. But in the case of the 4-county fire, the governor issued the disaster declaration 1 week before then, and we knew exactly where that was going to occur. We knew it was going to occur in north central Kansas, particularly in those 4 counties that actually did have that weather-related event. And had we had this bill, the incident commander would have been chosen by the locals, and I will talk about that because we have some clarifying language that needs to occur. That incident commander for that complex, and I think Angie Morgan might describe this more. She has much more knowledge than I do on this. When you have a complex or multiple counties that are affected, you have to have, under FEMA guidelines, an incident commander in order to try to receive federal dollars to assist in that area. That did not happen in the 4-county fire. And there was no way for FEMA dollars to come in. Some did, but in some particular aspects of what you could apply for, couldn't, because there was no incident commander for the complex. So that is what this bill is doing. This bill is saying that KDIM is in charge. They also get in contact with the respectable departments and agencies to assist the locals, to help them, to get rid of any type of confusion of what might happen. I'll give an example. There was 1,500 dead cattle in the 4-county fire. And there was a lot of confusion on what the parameters were from KDHE in regards to digging a pit and how many cows could be in that pit. Some were saying it was 2, but the regulation actually says 50. And so this would clarify and actually dissolve that confusion when we have a collective effort by the state to assist the locals on exactly what needs to be done. Now, I'll reference back to the incident commander. And I've talked to the governor's office, the adjutant general, the firefighters, and the intent of the bill, when it was written, is not for the adjutant general to appoint somebody. That is for the locals to decide. So they will decide who is going to be the incident commander, just the way it is now. But what it does, it has the responsibility of the adjutant general to make sure that those incident commanders are in place prior to the event, so we can have those in place if FEMA dollars are requested, because that is a guideline by FEMA. If you have the situation like the 4-county fire, where it was a complex, the adjutant general is made responsible to make sure that somebody is in place for that complex so those FEMA dollars can be requested for as well. So I would say this is a systematic, structured response from the state. It has the state responsible for any type of weather-related event, but it does not take away local control. The state is there to assist our constituents and those affected by a weather-related event. And so with that, Mr. Vice Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate this. You know, in my area, there was a fire, what, two years, I think, or 3 years before this one in Barber and Comanche County, and then on the other side in Clark and Comanche County, they weren't as big. I mean, they've just gotten bigger every time. And then this one occurred, and there was a lot of, during that time, there was a lot of unsurety of who they were supposed to contact and everything to get the necessary help. So I appreciate this. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chairman, for your excellent testimony. Okay, so I like the idea of the coordination of existing resources, and I like the idea of helping our communities get the funds that they need, get the resources they need, provide the grants that they need. But my concern is the fiscal note, and so sometimes the fiscal notes are not always right where our intent is. So I wanted some help with that, because it says that this bill as is would cost $6 million, and that would be attributable to 49 new FTE positions, 40 new vehicles, and information technology equipment for the new staff at a cost of $6.1 million. And again, if our goal is to coordinate existing resources, coordinate one person with another person, and to help with grant, I don't understand 49 new positions and 40 vehicles.
I don't either. To be quite honest, I don't understand the fiscal note as myself. That was not the intent. We're using existing resources that the state already has. And so the idea that we need to create more FTEs and have more expenditures in regards to this. If we look back at the 4-county fire and the state agencies that did come out and assist, there was no fiscal note. And so I'm perplexed myself in regards to the fiscal note as to why there would need to be additional FTEs, especially when we're just coordinating a more structured idea of how the state is going to respond using the departments and agencies that we currently have.
Okay, well, that is a relief to hear, and the intent doesn't always match what actually gets written. So maybe if we just take a second look at what was written in the bill and why they would construe it to mean that they would need all of this to implement the bill, that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. And if you'll, you've been here for a while, sometimes the fiscal notes don't actually mirror the intent. But the intent is to use existing resources. There shouldn't be any more FTEs. There shouldn't be more expenditures. And like I said, hopefully these events don't occur. But in the case that they do, I think the state needs to have a structured response on how we're going to address them. The only fiscal note would be the Disaster Contingency Fund, which the representative from Johnson was referencing before. And that's to assist the locals. And so it's a little bit different than the emergency fund, because this is specifically used for the weather-related disasters and trying to assist those communities who, like I said, Paradise is a community of 50 people. If they would have been able to get some FEMA dollars and they had to have a match, it would have been extremely difficult for them, or that whole area, which is a very rural area of the 4-county fire, to try to generate that money to meet the match. The other thing is, this is not specific just for FEMA dollars as well. So a few years ago, there was massive flooding in a small community of Natoma, Kansas, which has a population of about 150. Well, because of the FEMA guidelines, they did not meet the threshold for disaster assistance. And this fund could actually be used for that as well, for our smaller communities who don't meet the FEMA threshold, but could access these dollars. And to be honest, there are still homes, even after 3 years after that flood, that are sitting there with mold, nobody living in them, because they don't have the resources to tear them down. And so this fund could actually be used for that as well, aside from just trying to draw down federal dollars from FEMA.
Representative Williams?
Yes, and the last question was about the State Fire Chiefs Association. You're working closely with the State Fire Chiefs Association to find collaborative language so that, to your point, that you're not taking over control, not you personally, the state's not taking control, but we still have local control. So you're working with them?
Yes.
Okay,
Actually, we
perfect.
had a conference call on Monday.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, and Representative Williams, the Adjutant General will be giving testimony, so that may be a question on the fiscal note. Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, and the representative from Butler did a great job of expressing my primary concern, which was fiscal note and the number of employees and things like that. So,
Representative Owens,
Yes.
could I interject? Senator Bowers needs to get to her committee meeting, so I wanted her to make her brief comments, and then she's going to step out.
Senator Bowers.
Troy, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I have a budget committee I run, and we have 5 budgets in 55 minutes, so they're counting on me because I don't have a vice chair. So I'm very happy to be here. In fact, I have 3 of my 5 reps in this room, and very honored to serve with Troy on the Wildfire Task Force as well, where these ideas came from, listening to the people from across the state, and then trying to put these thoughts down on paper. Whether we have it right the first time that Representative Troy did, we can tweak that to make sure. But also, not just so it's not wildfire, that's the task force we learned these facts from, but other disasters like the flood that Troy just mentioned as well. So taking into consideration of that and the structure and the control, but the funds are the most important as well. So all those rolled together, I think we have a good idea to start with. If we need to modify it, we're happy to work with you, and I'll speak for the Senate side. I'm thrilled to do that over there too. So I'm so sorry I have to dash, and Troy knows the answers to the questions that you would have asked me. So thank you very much. And you have my written testimony as well. So
Thank you, Senator.
All right. Sorry, Representative. I just wanted to make sure that she was able to express her comments before she had to leave the committee room.
not a problem, I understand. So following up, so this is specific to weather-related emergencies. There have been plenty of wildfires get out of hand that weren't necessarily weather-related, or that was the start. Is there a reason why this is very narrowly focused to weather-related emergencies?
The reason why weather-related is specified in the bill is to try to keep it concise and not have state resources or the agencies and departments. I mean, they're going to respond to those as well. But this is, when you have a weather-related event, most likely the governor is going to issue a declaration prior to that happening. Another hazard that might come about, like if it's a wildfire that was actually instigated by an individual and then it just spread to be a wildfire, you won't have that declaration prior. This is to assist in making sure that we have everything set in place. So when the event does occur, we have the governor's declaration, then the adjutant general makes sure that we have the incident commanders and everybody in place. So when that weather event occurs, we have the structured response from the state. For example, in regards to the 4-county fire, the governor issued, and I mentioned this before, she issued that declaration 1 week prior. And in fact, I was on a jet with her when we were attending the funeral for Senator Bob Dole in Washington, D.C. And that she issued that 1 week before the 4-county fire. So we could have had all the processes in place because we had time to do that. So that's why it's weather related, because we usually know exactly what the affected areas are going to be. We have prior knowledge of when it may occur, and when that governor's declaration happens, that's what instigates the state then starting to have that structured response for the affected area when it occurs. If it's a, I'm trying to think of the word, but an event that occurs because it was, just instantaneous at that moment, you don't have that preparedness in place because it happened at that time. But when you have a governor's declaration in place prior to the event, this is what sets up the process for the state to have a response.
I understand, and I've got a little bit of hesitation. I understand what we're trying to accomplish here. I'm always hesitant to have the state get involved in local emergencies and local events like that. I look forward to further discussion on this. Thank you.
Well, and what I would say in regards to that, Representative, and I preface this, and actually I'm going to work with Jill on an amendment to make sure that as far as the locals, so your emergency managers, your incident commanders that are selected, nothing changes. The locals are in charge. The state is not coming in and directing them on what to do. The state is coming in and assisting them. There is no control of the state telling the locals what to do. It's just we're making sure that everything is in place as far as a structured response, not to have control over the situation. It's to assist the local areas during the time of mass confusion, mass devastation, and then trying and using those state resources to make sure that we are getting as much as we possibly can for that disaster from the federal government in regards to FEMA.
And if I may just follow up on that. So again, I understand many parts of that, but having served in incident command for 17 years in the fire service, when we place the authority of who gets to choose who that incident commander is on somebody that is not local, such as the adjutant general in this situation, they're the ones deciding. And so it really is still am I misunderstanding that the adjutant general is choosing who that person?
No, and this is what we have to have the clarifying amendment if the chairman decides to work the bill. So, and I'm going to work with Jill on that to clarify that language in section 1, where the intent was not that the adjutant general chooses or appoints. The intent was that the locals choose, but the adjutant general has to make sure that there is an incident commander in place before the weather-related event. So, yeah, and actually I had a discussion with the adjutant general last week about that. Because they don't want the responsibility of appointing or choosing somebody to be the incident commander. It has to be a local individual, and the locals decide who that incident commander is. We just need to make sure that that incident commander is in place before the event occurs.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Chairman, actually, don't get me wrong, I'm not adversarial on this. I think all of this is good stuff except for maybe the funding. But it sounds to me like we're coordinating something that really should already be coordinated. We have an Office of Emergency Management, right?
You would think it would, but I will tell you in the 4-county fire, that was not the case.
Do we fund the Office of Emergency Management?
Yes.
We might want to talk about that at that funding time. If they're not even assigning an incident commander, isn't that something they would normally do?
I would probably defer to the adjutant general's office on that question. That did not occur in the 4-county fire. Yes, we had incident commanders in the counties that were affected, but because it was multiple counties and it was considered a complex, there was no incident commander.
KDM didn't.
I would have to defer to them in regards to that.
So we make a habit of accessing FEMA funds, though, right? This isn't something new, is it?
No, it's not new.
Okay, so we have normally assigned an incident commander, but we didn't in this case.
I would say this would be something that is structured, because we're not going to have the same adjutant general in perpetuity. And so we're going to have changes.
We'll have KDM.
And so this is a structured response. So we have the state assisting the locals and a paradigm of exactly how that is supposed to occur, regardless of who is the adjutant general or in charge of KDM.
Okay, I'm going to look forward to further testimony on this. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Representative Concanon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Who makes the decision of whether it's weather-related?
The governor.
Okay.
The governor.
Okay, all right. I've got a situation in my district right now with the cold snap that a well pump was frozen, and we've got a community of about 500 people that don't have water.
Well, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I would presume, And I would say the intent is that if it is a cold weather event and the governor issues a disaster declaration because of the cold weather, that would qualify.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Estes.
I hear you using the word assist, but is an accurate mental model facilitate that we need somebody who's connecting all the dots?
That's a very good, yes, it's a very good word, facilitate.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
assisting the local individuals that are affected.
And I won't ask my second question, which is, do you have a favorite twin or a favorite committee member?
I think a lot of the committee members are enjoying the fact to question me. I do not have a favorite twin. My mother will say that Chancellor started walking at 9.5 months, so he's been mobile for quite a while. Charles could care less. He just sits there and watches his brother, but he's the one that talks. And so my mom says that Chancellor is going to get into trouble, and then Charles is going to tell on him.
All right, Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I admire your leadership, you know, in your current role while we hound the chair. You're supposed to smile on that one, Chairman Waymaster.
Oh, sorry.
You know, I'm just thinking about, I understand kind of how this happens. You know, we have a wildfire and it pops up in one county, then it pops up in another county, and, you know, they're swamped, so they don't get that interaction going on that needs to happen. What do you think about the scale? Is there a scalability issue on this, like when we have a blizzard that affects half of western Kansas or massive flooding like we've had in 8 or 9 counties at a time?
No, I would say the scalability, and like if it would affect 58 counties in the state of Kansas as far as a blizzard, that would be something that I think KDM would have to work out, as making sure that we divide that up as like northwest, south central, you know, whatever the case may be, and making sure that there's an incident commander for those particular areas. Because you might have a blizzard that's going to be affecting a large portion of the state, but the area of the effectiveness or what happens in regards to that blizzard may be different in southwest Kansas as opposed to north central. And if you're trying to access FEMA dollars, that may be different, because you're going to have different snow levels or whatever the case may be as far as ice. And so that would need to be probably tweaked and worked out.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, you know, as you went into that explanation, when we have these wildfires, you know, sometimes they'll have like a quarter of the state under a wildfire watch, and sometimes it's like whack-a-mole. You're not exactly sure where it's going to pop up and create some of the issues we've had in the past. So, yeah.
So I would just say in regards to that, if we would have like an event that happened in December of 2021, where there was a high potential for many areas, not just the area in north central Kansas, but we have these sectioned off, and then you have an incident commander. So if that event does occur, then there's somebody in place for that complex, as mentioned in regards to getting dollars from FEMA. But like I said before, hopefully we never get past that step. And so if we don't get past step 1, that's a good thing. But if we have to then move on to step 2, then that's because the weather event ended up being disastrous.
I just sometimes have a concern that we appoint an incident commander and he's not in the right place. But yeah, I understand.
Well, and the other thing that I'll kind of elaborate is, so in regards to the 4-county fire, you had like the emergency manager from Russell and Ellsworth County was out fighting the fires. You have volunteer firefighting, and you need to have someone that's there in coordination with the state to alert them of what's going on. And they did. I'm not saying that they didn't, but at the same time, had many different roles. And it was very chaotic during that time, because you're trying to protect citizens, but at the same time we're trying to alert the state on what's going on. If you have somebody in place that is alerting them, it just makes it more structured. The other reason, and I wanted to mention this, and I mentioned this last year, I believe, when we had a discussion in regards to the Wildfire Task Force and the 4-county fire, this alleviates confusion. And the reason why I say that is because on Christmas Eve, a member of the congressional delegation went to the affected area of the Fort County fire, and people were asking the same thing as they asked Senator Bowers and myself, is what can the state do? And the response back to them was, well, the state hasn't done anything. So we can't do anything on the federal level because the state has to start it. That generated more confusion, that generated more angst, and then we were getting calls, I was getting calls by residents, county commissioners, and others saying, why hasn't the state done anything? And I said, the state has. The governor issued the declaration a week before the event. That should have started everything and had the response in place. So this would actually assist not only the state level, but also our congressional delegation to make sure they're like, okay, the state has done something. Instead of going out there and saying, well, the state hasn't done anything, so federal government can't do anything for you.
Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've mentioned, and the senator has mentioned, the wildfire task force, and I've not followed the work of that, but serving on a task force or two, I'm curious, was there a recommendation made? Have they had a report out to the legislature? Did they chime in upon this bill or concept?
Yes, there is recommendations that are made by the wildfire task force, and Susan, I don't know if had those been reported or distributed to the committee members yet. So there were recommendations. I will say I am not wholeheartedly in agreement with those recommendations. As many of you know, that when I am not serving in the legislature, I work for my father and my uncle on our farming operation in Russell County. And one of the recommendations is changing farming practices. And I don't think that's a step that we actually need to go down. And actually, it's very confusing as far as the recommendation. There is other recommendations that I don't agree with as well. But there were recommendations, and yes, this bill was discussed when we had our meeting at the Highway Patrol in Salina last year, and actually was discussed in previous meetings as well.
So did the task force adopt this as part of their recommendations?
They did not adopt this as their recommendation because this was actually introduced prior to them making their final recommendations, but it was discussed.
Okay, and then I'm not sure if this is appropriate, so no comment is acceptable, but you've mentioned an amendment that will come that will, alleviate some concerns. Do you think there's a chance that alleviates any opponents to the bill?
I hope it does.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Representative Akla.
So I've been an elected official a long time. Been up here since 2012 and have 31 years in local government and state government. I always found out that you put together a lot of committee, a lot of task force. Nobody realizes what the real issue is unless you live within the area. And so I hear all this questioning going on, and I have a place in my heart for rural areas, especially because they're pillars of those people are pillars of those communities. They've been there generations. Their kids have been there. They're in farming, or else their life is that area. When you talk about populations of 50 and 100, a lot of times they don't have the emergency management resource people to, I think, to address these issues right away. And 9 times out of 10, those people have been affected by the disaster. So their focus isn't going to be 100% on trying to figure out where I can go or to get assistance. So I think you can beat this up. My whole thing is people and helping people and making sure that there's something in place so someone doesn't get completely wiped out, like you talked about, the man that lost his house completely to the fire. So my question to you is, though, this is the only thing that comes up in my mind, is does this bill, how does that coordinate with people that have insurance? They get the insurance for the damages that were done, and then the funding comes in. Is there a coordination there or a separation?
No, and if I'm not hearing your question correctly, correct me. This is not for like deductibles or anything like that. What this would do, like, for example, the way that the intent of writing this bill was the Adjutant General would start the process, and when the event occurred in the four-county fire, which I'm not saying the insurance commissioner didn't go out, she did, but they would start coordinating everything as far as having somebody from the insurance department out there to assist with claims, or if people had questions about their
So there
insurance.
is a presence then.
Yes, and so they would be there in assistance, and maybe not just for one day as what occurred. I mean, maybe that person needs to be out there for a few more days or a week to assist everybody, because when you lose your home, I mean, you're trying to figure out exactly what all the contents were, and actually there was a former insurance agent who was there in Paradise who said, you know, the best thing to do is at many points during the year, take pictures of every single room in your house so you can have a reference back to what actually is in your home. And then if something happens where your home is devastated and burned down by a fire, you have proof for the insurance company. It's like, here are my contents. Here are the pictures of what I lost. And that's something that maybe the insurance department could do now. But it's just to have the state agencies assist those that are affected after the weather event.
Okay. Well, that, that answers my question. I know you represent that area, and so you're lobbying pretty hard for it, but I tend to agree with you that we need to put something in place that's tangible and that works, so we don't come back later on and say we should have done this and we didn't do it. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the chairman? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can get back to your committee now.
All right, thank you for letting
Here
me
you have
testify.
here you have a terrible vice chair, so you better get back there very quick. So he's out of control, I'll tell you. Next, we have Angie Morgan she's the Deputy Director of Emergency Management. Welcome, Angie.
Thanks for the opportunity to present today. I was going to make more of a formal testimony. You have General Venerdes, our Adjutant General's position on the bill, but in light, and if it serves your pleasure, I would like to kind of just give some background and then try to answer some of the questions that have already been asked, if that's okay.
That's fine, yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So there is a national comprehensive structure. It starts at the local level with the local emergency operations plans. And Kansas has a Kansas response plan. And now, since September of last year, we have a state recovery plan that's a companion to our Kansas response plan, which is our operational plan for the state of Kansas. And then above that is the national framework for response. And when I talk about response, I talk about where there's a lot of activity going on. There's fires, and they're putting out the fires, and there's ambulances and evacuations. And then we talk about recovery, and that's after the event. And sometimes recovery and response are just like they're immediate. So when we talk about the state's response, it'll be more during the recovery phase when I mention that, after the fire's been put out and all the damage and stuff. So that's called the National Incident Management System, and that was adopted after 9/11, the terrorism events, because of the lack of interoperable communications. There was no standard to response, and there's elements within that comprehensive NIMS that encompasses resource ordering, resource management, typing, credentials, the roles of the incident commander. And so there's incident management, which happens, that's the response. And then there's emergency management, and that's the support. So you've got the incident commander out saying, these are the resources I need to fight the fire, and they're interfacing back with their county emergency manager in that emergency operations center or on the hood of their truck saying, I need more engines, I need water, I need aerial support. So the incident commander is coordinating with emergency management. And that emergency manager is then feeding that up to us in KDM and emergency management at our CDOC if we're open, or our operations center. So that's how the flow of information comes. We never want to ask the incident commander, what do you need? Many times, and this is unfortunate in Kansas, in most states, especially in rural areas, but those emergency managers are triple-hatted. They're also firefighters, they're police reserve officers, they may be the county weed department. So when there's a response, it's difficult for that emergency manager to do the emergency management things, to support that incident commander, because they have to make a choice. And that's a terrible position to be placed in. Do I secure the scene and arrest the person that started the fire, or do I call KDM and say, I need XYZ to help the incident commander who's the fire chief? And then what about the evacuation that's going on? And then, oh, by the way, not only do I have one incident in my county, I've got 4 fires in my county with 4 different incident commanders. So there is a system and there are plans. What I'm really happy about is the new recovery plan. We've always supported communities when they've asked to provide assistance during recovery, to get FEMA assistance if that's possible, or Small Business Administration. We try to set up a multi-agency coordination center at the county level or the city level, and bring in the Department of Revenue to give duplicate driver's license. Ag is usually involved, especially with an agriculture incident. So we've always had that. It's been part of the Kansas response plan, but now it's on a separate plan. It's been promulgated by the governor, and it really gives KDM some oomph to say, the governor said you're going to do this, you have no choice, and we're going to tattletale. So that's in my words, not anyone else's. So that's really going to help us, and it's going to provide this structure. We also have a template now for the counties, and we have given those to the counties, and we've done tabletop exercises with all of our 7 regions on recovery, and with all the state agencies and state partners that are in the recovery plan. So we haven't had a chance to formally implement that plan yet, but every response and every recovery operation, we do what's called an after-action review and an improvement planning workshop that says, where do we need to improve? What do we need to change? What policies are we missing? What resources are we needing? Is it people? Is it training? Is it plans? Is it procedures? What is it? So that's a cycle. The confusion, I believe, with the local incident command, and I also brought you some handouts for reference, and in those explains the federal assistance programs. We do support a dedicated disaster fund because we, after a federal major presidential declaration for public assistance, and that's for governments, tribes, townships, cities, certain nonprofits, there's a cost share of 75% and 25% non-federal share. The state, traditionally, our policy has been that the state pays 10% and that local eligible applicant pays 15%. Senator or Representative Waymaster is right. There are times when in small jurisdictions cannot come up with that 15%. And past history with Greensburg, the state waived that and paid the 25% share. They did that in Andover in 1991 too, and that was my first disaster, so I remember it well. So yeah, there are times that they can't, and we've made certain criteria that says, per capita, the impacts on your communities, and then brought that forth to you guys to make that determination. There are no state programs. So if you want a dedicated state program, we're going to have to develop that with criteria, or you're going to have to set some parameters of who administers that program. And all the programs that KDM has access to are federal, and they're described in law or policies and regulations. And we're not opposed to a state disaster recovery program. One does not exist, so someone would have to create that. So there's three types, well, there's actually 4 grants. So there's public assistance, which is to governments. It seems weird because it says public. And then there's individual assistance, which is to families and individuals and renters, not agriculture. And then there's what's called hazard mitigation funds that come after the disaster to prevent the next one or lessen the impacts. So in the context of this, I'm primarily going to talk about public assistance, which is firefighting, evacuation, overtime for the response, and then the fire management assistance grant, which is a small program under the public assistance grant. And on the last page of this handout, it explains the fire management grant. The criteria for that is that it has to be big enough that if you didn't ask for it, it would result in a major presidential declaration. And that is huge, because if you look under individual assistance or public assistance, you're looking at $5 million for public structures, and you're looking about at 100 homes destroyed. So in a rural area, it's very difficult to get a fire management assistance grant, or what we call an FMAG. What an FMAG does, it does not give anybody any funds except for the firefight. So all these farmers and ranchers and individuals who have lost their home, they're not eligible for funds. So what happens is when only the governor can request a fire management assistance grant, and I think there's like 5 or 6 pages of questions that have to be answered when we make that request. We have one shot, or we have to wait 30 days to appeal it. So we don't ever want to ask for it too soon, because then we'll be denied. And that's happened in decades ago, and we've learned a lot since then. So I want you to know when I explain this, I don't agree with the rules, but these are the rules. I too grew up not far from, well, actually, I guess you represent Lincoln County. So I get that my dad, my brothers were volunteer firefighters. My mom and I take sandwiches out to the lake when it was on fire, seen the cattle, everything. But in FEMA's big world, a lot of these laws were made for big states like California, Washington State, where there's a lot of wildfires. And if you believe in climate change or what, it doesn't matter. Our state is getting hotter, it's getting drier, and our events, not only wildfires, but floods and snow and extreme temperatures, everything has gotten more complex and more catastrophic and more forceful. I mean, it's going to be 60 on Thursday. You know, our heads are spinning. What are we going to have? Flood from snow melt, you know? So FEMA looks at a populous area. Okay, so where are you going to get that in Russell and Ellsworth and Lincoln County? It's difficult. I have told my staff that we have already pre-positioned all the resources that we can. We have got all the mutual aid deployed and dispatched that we can. We have all the resources to fight the fire. What's going to change when we ask FEMA for assistance for an FMAG? Nothing. We're doing all we can. All it is a reimbursement if we meet the threshold after the fact and maybe get the payment a year later. So we want to make for dang sure that we're going to get it. So what we try to do is look for areas where we can, and following their rules, they want one incident commander for the whole, what they consider complex. So when you have, and it's got to be the same fire. So the 4-county fire was not the same county, first of all. We didn't know that during the night of the fire, but we were advising the counties that we want to try to get a complex, like we did in 2016, I believe. It was called the Lake Wilson Complex. and it was Russell, Ellsworth, and Lincoln. So it was a complex of any fire that happened within that complex. So you designate one incident commander for this FMAG. And so then what that does is it takes the imaginary lines of the county away. And then you've got this bigger circle. And then you can look at Russell, you can look at Hayes, you can look at, Paradise. You can add all these up and say, well, there's all this critical infrastructure in public, city halls, and there's only one business and there's only one hospital. And then it makes it, well, now there's, 6 hospitals and so that complex puts it higher where, oh yeah, this is, this would constitute a major presidential. So that's the importance of a one incident commander for a complex. So hopefully that explains it and reassures you that there is a comprehensive system in place nationwide. We plan for all hazards because we try to find common elements. Our plans are based on functional, common functions. And many of you have heard me say this before, but I was in response and recovery for 18 years and loved it. I spent 9 months in Greensburg doing community recovery. I felt huge value, but I never really understood all hazards planning because I thought planning was so depressing. And I wanted to be out there with my muck boots on. And so I had the opportunity to go to the World Trade Center, and I worked the World Trade Center recovery. And while I was there, they had a passenger plane crash. And they asked me if I wanted to go help on the scene. And I'm like, oh, it's so cold, and I've already worked 12 hours. And I think, what am I doing? Yes, I want to go. And I was scared to death because here's this girl from Kansas that they called me Dorothy all week. I wanted to represent Kansas. I wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing. And so I went terrified. And the first thing I saw was perimeter control. I thought, I've seen that on every tornado I've worked. I saw firefighting operations with houses being, the fire was out. Saw that on tornadoes, saw that on floods. I saw them doing search and rescue. Saw that on every event had gone on. They had communications. They had feeding canteens out for the first responders. The only thing I hadn't seen was, how they pick up pieces of humans and plane crashes. And so it was a very learning experience and quite frankly gave me some kind of comfort knowing if we ever had something in Kansas, I wasn't going to lose my mind if I was the one that had to go out there. But I thought, man, this looks like every scene that we've had in Kansas that I've gone out to with response, and they're still doing recovery, and they're still doing response. And then something hit me in the face and said, that's all hazards. That's why you do it. There's common things to every disaster. There's always going to be communications problems. There's always going to be a need for resources. There's always going to be probably electricity that needs restored or water. People are going to have needs for shelter, watering, all those things. Volunteers are going to have to come in. And I'm like, planning's awesome. And so then I was a planner. And so that's why I have so much passion of these products because I know they work. I've seen it on the national level. I've gone to Florida a couple of times. I've been to New York City. And during our flooding in 2019, we had 13 states come in to Kansas to assist our emergency managers. They could not have done this unless this national system was already in place. So hopefully that provides you some assurance and just perspective of where we are with our state. So I stand for questions, and thank you for letting me deviate from Mark's testimony.
That's perfectly fine. Actually, I prefer to have comments made aside from the written testimony, so
Thank you.
I do appreciate that. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to have you back in your spot. The other guy just really couldn't cut the mustard. Yeah, he was a hack. So, Angie, thanks for your testimony. And I do want to thank you for all of the late nights that you spent working on disasters across the state. I've been down there in the basement where you guys work, you know, when the floods were going on, and, you know, your commitment to the safety of Kansans. I appreciate that. I just want you to know. So it sounds like from your testimony that this bill really does help us make sure something happens in the process. When you've got the guy out there fighting the fire in Lincoln County and the next guy over in I'm not familiar with that area to name another county, but, you know, everybody's swamped. They're dying. They've been out there for hours by the time we realize this thing is getting out of control. And they don't have time to call the guy in the neighboring county to set up this framework. Am I understanding you right? I mean, they're busy.
They're busy, yes.
They're trying to
you're-
save
you're
their
absolutely
houses,
correct.
their schools.
Our existing statutes and plans at all levels won't fix it. I mean, they're in place. People need to follow them. They need to implement them. The challenge to us is we don't get the call. I heard there's a community that doesn't have, of 500 that doesn't have water. We're not aware of that. We can't help someone if we're not called, because we would need 49 people in the county that were full-time state employees to give us situational awareness. So when we actually called Russell County and Trego County, because we heard them on the 800 megahertz, and we said, it sounds like you have a fire. So we have to have the information, because we had over 100 fires that day, and 22 of them were severe. And we were providing a lot of assistance to smaller counties before as they made their way in southwest and northwest Kansas, before they ever got to Russell and Ellis. Gove County was hit extremely hard that day.
I know what you're saying, but I mean, it does sound like, you know, if we know 15 days in advance that we're going to have this problem, again, it's
we actually had fires. The reason why that declaration was done was because we had fires starting on the 15th or before the 15th, and that declaration is good for 15 days. And it's the same nature of the disaster. It's a wildfire. So it was open because we had already been working fires.
Right, but if we would have had an incident manager for that incident we knew was coming, then we could have adjusted the size of the containment area or whatever after the fact, possibly.
I don't know that you can pre-designate an IC, because it's like, I'm not an IC expert, and I know there's a lot of firefighters in here, so I'll let them deal in their world. I'm emergency management, they're incident management. What we find out when we pre-designate something for a catastrophic event or complex event, it's not available at the time of the disaster. So if it's a facility or a warehouse or a staging area, it belongs to private property, or it's got revenue generating, or the person's on vacation. And I mean, the last fire that was in Hutch, the fire chief, the incident commander, was out of town and he flew back. But, you know, he had command. But that IC comes with a lot of responsibilities, and you have to be credentialed and trained and qualified. And I would never be an IC on a fire, never. Like, I would kill someone. I'd kill my responders, and I'd kill all the people, because I am not qualified to be an IC.
Representative Francis.
Right, and I understand all of that, but it sounds like we had a critical step that was missed in this deal, because those 4 counties, it didn't happen. And we knew something was going to happen in that area, and we could have addressed that possibly.
So command is local, and you have to give your authority up. And not everyone's willing to do that. Like, you can have I'm stepping way over, but you can have unified command where you have two. But remember that complex is only for that grant. And I don't know if they would have said there's one incident commander, that it would have changed the outcome of the response, because that's not why we wanted a complex. We wanted a complex so we could get grants after the fact, not to fight the fire. How they fight fire with area command and unified command and just incident command, That's scalable, and they are the experts in that. All I want is tell me something happened so I can prepare to get you the right resources, because it's going to take time, because there's 22 other counties competing with your resources. And oh, by the way, there's a thunderstorm watch coming, or tornadoes, because with a 105-mile-an-hour wind, Johnson County didn't want to give up their resources either. So it's very complex. That's why I say all these events, not just weather. I mean, COVID is the same thing. You need to take care of people and make them safe. And how do we as emergency management do that? Well, we could get the PPE, the masks, the gloves. We weren't making policy decisions on the health side, but we're supporting those local communities on a health emergency, because it has, the people have the same needs. They need to be protected.
I'm kind of glad that you mentioned COVID, and that's the reason why this is strictly weather-related, is because the governor did issue a disaster declaration for COVID. Well, my intent was not to have, if we have another COVID-19 pandemic, I don't want the money that's for the disaster contingency fund going for COVID. This is for weather-related events, and that's specifically why it says that in the bill. It's for weather-related events, and that's why it's sized down. So if we do have another pandemic, that doesn't qualify for any of the parameters here. Any further questions for Ms. Morgan? Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here and describing the process that we have in place. I'm glad to hear that there is a structure in place. But my question still kind of comes back to, what does this bill, what chink in that process does this bill fix?
Morgan.
So a dedicated funding source would be the change that would be positive for us. Everything else is already written within statute, except for the incident commander, which we've talked enough on. So what happens is, let's just say that this last winter storm would be eligible. It's not going to be, but let's just say for fun it was. And it's a $10 million disaster. So if we had to respond to an event like the state, actually a wildfire is better because we have more resources to give. So let's say we have a wildfire this afternoon and we deploy aerial suppression, and we deploy task force, and we need compact resources from South Dakota, and so there's costs. So what that would do is it gives us the assurance when we order all those resources that there's funds there to pay for them. What we have to do now is bring that bill and say, we have this disaster for the state, and this is the state response cost. Will you fund it? And you've never said no. Or at least I don't know of an adjutant general that's lost their job because of that. What it also does is, so let's say we have a flood after the wildfire, and we made the presidential declaration with all the money and the 75% non-federal share. If there was a community that couldn't pay their 10% or their 15%, because the eligible applicant is responsible for paying that. And there was a process to come and say, I can't pay, we're bankrupt. You could say, we're paying your 15% out of this pot of money that's dedicated. And then what Representative Waymaster would like to do is say, okay, we had a small event that didn't get to be a presidential declaration, and there's 20 households, in Willard, Kansas or something that are underinsured, because we don't duplicate any insurance. So that all comes off the top. But since there's no state program, we'd have to define all that. But let's just say there were 20 homes, and maybe they just had really bad roof damages or whatever, muck and gut their basements out, and that they didn't have funds. Then those individuals that had unmet needs after insurance would say, I need help. And then that $10 million, there'd have to be a program with criteria, because you wouldn't want us just handing out money, and probably a cap or a appeal. And then they would get that money to help them, the underinsured. And we find that a lot. There'll be a major storm go, and it could be hail damage, it could be flood. You've probably heard some of the stories at Mulvane where it always floods in their basements, and it would help those people.
If I could continue just
You
a
may.
little bit. So we already help those people with our emergency fund, is that correct? Or
No,
disaster
no.
relief fund?
Only when since there's no state program, I can't give them anything. Our agency can't give them anything because we don't have the authority to give them anything and there's no money. But when there's a presidential federal declaration, then monies come from the federal government, and that's where they get their funds. And out of that is a 25% state share. And again, current process is to get that 25% state share, we would come to you and say, we've asked for individual assistance from the president, he's granted it, but oh, by the way, every time FEMA gives a grant to a Kansas citizen that's eligible, you're paying us 25% of that. And the last time that we've been able to do that was back in 2007. They're very difficult to get, very, very difficult to get.
Okay, so the funding is the main point,
That would help.
the real peanut of this bill.
That would help, yeah,
Okay.
us, yes. And I also shared just some, on the response, the state response, just some averages of what we spend on that. So,
Okay, now, but we do currently have a disaster relief fund that was $10 million, if I heard it
No.
described correctly.
No.
None whatsoever? Interesting.
yeah, we come to you after the fact and we say, we got a federal declaration and we have 43 counties with 500 eligible applicants, and this is the 10% share. And then the State Finance Council or the legislative body grants us that, but it's after the fact. So these would be dedicated, and then the legislature would define the parameters of how we can get that money.
Perfect.
And the process, I believe, would be pretty much the same as it is now, but it would just be fully funded before a disaster.
Gotcha. And now I have clarity as to what this bill actually does, so I'm thankful for that. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Representative Kincannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, I just wanted to follow up just real quick, but in case I missed you afterwards, but I just found out about the water issue last night.
Okay.
And the governor's office is aware of it, and they are meeting with your people while we're meeting here.
Could you tell me what community so we can make sure?
It is called Sundowner West
Mobile home.
Meadows.
Okay, yeah.
Sundowner. Yeah.
Or,
Yep.
we knew they were in a boil water, but they don't have any water now?
Well, I could show you a picture of what it looks like.
We'll follow up.
It's brown.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll follow up on that.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You had testified that individual funds haven't been made available since 2007. Was that Greensburg or Chapman? Can't remember the
It was actually Greensburg, and then in July 3rd of that year, there was the Southeast Coffeyville resource oil spill flooding, and 300 homes were destroyed. And so we had 2 individual assistance federal. There's also what's called the Small Business Administration loan, which is a lot lesser, but they're loans. And we go after those all the time if we can find those 25, but that's not really a grant because it's a loan.
Thank you for that. And other question was, who would be dispersing these funds? Is it, I haven't looked in the statute enough to.
So currently with the Public Assistance Program, KDM administers portions of that program with FEMA. There's certain things that we can't do, only they have authority for. But we actually give the funding based on, after FEMA says, yes, this is eligible and this is how much, then our agency processes all of that. And we work through the eligible applicant from kickoff meetings to scoping the projects, doing the damage inventory, and they're assigned that from cradle to grave then until they get their check.
But under this proposed legislation, it would remain the same in terms of these weather-related events?
In the bill, it states the State Finance Council administers the funds.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Once the funds are given to us, then we give them to, there's a whole process. I don't believe that would change, but I think if you want a state program, recovery program, then that's all going to have to be, like, I'm just assuming it would be our agency, but that you could make it any state agency or office, so.
Thank you for that clarification. I used to work as a congressional staffer for 2 members of Congress, so I've witnessed quite a few disasters and whatnot. And from my own experience, there are a lot of individuals, I can confirm what you had said, that really fall through the cracks because only public assistance is made available. So
It's very difficult to get.
I would support the concept of a fund to help those, especially in more rural communities. Thank you.
Any further questions for Ms. Morgan? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I'll see you later. We do have some proponent written-only testimony, and that's from Claudia Hissong from the Kansas Farm Bureau. She's the State Affairs Manager. But that's the only proponent testimony that we have this morning in regards to House Bill 2468. So if there's anybody else that would want to speak as a proponent, here's your chance. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to opponent testimony, and that would be Matt May, the Government Affairs and Legislative Liaison for the Kansas Emergency Managers Association. Matt?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. And members of the committee. With me is Jillian Rotary. She is with the Emergency Management Offices in Douglas County. I'm with Wyandotte County, and we want to give kind of a local boots on the ground perspective relative to this piece of legislation. She's actually the smart one. I'm just here to talk. So one of the things, you've already heard some great stuff that I think outlines some of our concerns. And that is that, as Representative Owens pointed out, incident commander is kind of a sacred term for us. And not only, it's predominantly coming out of the fire service, but I will tell you, it gets applied to a lot of different response agencies, law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. And I think maybe some of the angst here could be solved by simply a change in terminology. I also understand what you're attempting to do with an oversight. And that I actually used to be a part of when I lived in Florida, and I got a lot of my emergency management experience there. I was part of what was called a RIAT team, Rapid Impact Assessment Team. That came out after Hurricane Andrew, where we found that the locals were very myopically focused in dealing with their own resources, not realizing that there were a lot more state resources that were available to them. And so my part in that job was to understand what those particular groups were trying to accomplish, shadow them, and then say, hey, I think I can help you with that. And so maybe we could look at it from that perspective, and I think a simple change in terminology there might help us all feel better about that and not conflict with a system that's been out now for about 40 or 50 years about managing incidents and been refined with thousands and thousands and thousands of incidents input. So that's that input, that's that incident commander thing. I think if we can turn away from that terminology and create something else, a coordinator, and coordinator has its own touch points because that's a legal terminology and definition in statute, but we could find something or help with that. Another one is that weather-related incidents. We're concerned about that because we don't think in terms of an individual type of incident. We have professed for years and years and years an all-hazards approach. So at the county level particularly, but throughout the system, and Angie touched on this too, is that we are trying to get to a all-hazards approach, and many of these concerns I can see happening something that's not weather-related. So I think that might be a broader umbrella there, so we could address that. Let's see. There's also language in here about emergency management helping with insurance claims. I am not the guy you want to have doing insurance claims, so maybe some better explanation there too. I really appreciate your testimony, Chair, because it was very enlightening about where this was coming from and what was happening here. Really, I think the biggest things are that there are some positives in here, and I agree that this creation of this fund would be very helpful, particularly for the jurisdictions that don't have the wherewithal to be able to front that money. When we do something like that, and we expect to get some public assistance returned from FEMA, we still end up eating a majority of that last 25%. Because we typically don't get the support from the state, and we also have to do that 15% on our own. So we always look at it from that perspective. And that means sometimes we can't respond the way we would like to, because we just know that there's going to be a huge expense involved with that. And we have to look at that like everybody else and work within our means. But generally speaking, we front that, and it often takes months to years to get that money back. And there's a cost involved with that as well. So anything else you think we should touch on?
I would just add also that responding to a disaster is always chaotic. And just dealing with them heavily in 2019 and then also in 20, there are great challenges that are on emergency managers that are serving our communities, as you mentioned. And if we start to change the process by which we respond when it's one or another, we start to increase the complexity that's already before us. And if we're having to think, well, are we responding on this way or is it this process? And that becomes different based on whatever hazard and whomever is determining what that hazard is, that makes it that much more difficult for the locals to work through the processes to serve the communities that are relying on us. And so that's why we look at all hazards, and we want that singular approach that follows a national standard so that when we bring in those folks, as Angie mentioned, in 2019, some of those ended up in my jurisdiction. And they were a great help. And they could sit in my EOC and they could work with our folks because they know how the process functions. And they were very easily able to work in and supplement us and give us some rest when we needed it. And so the other piece, as you mentioned, even when you get a presidential declaration, there are still unmet needs. There will always be unmet needs. And that falls to the local jurisdiction, to our nonprofits, to all of the agencies that are already stretched and serving, those that are already in need, that are then hit proportionately, they're already hurting. And now we're putting them at a greater disadvantage. So the opportunity to have a fund which would also potentially be available for individuals that had unmet needs after insurance, after the disaster, as they try to put those pieces together, we can potentially increase the resilience of the state of Kansas and the people that we serve. And so the big thing here is the opportunity to have that fund that would be available, that then would make us more resilient and provide opportunities that we did not have before. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you. And I think if we happen to work the bill, we can work together on language and everything. And again, we had the reviser. That's why I asked the question. The bill does not require emergency managers to assist with insurance claims. And really what this bill does is it has responsibility of the state making sure that we're assisting the locals, the emergency managers, the firefighters, because that was not evident in the 4-county fire. And I will be quite honest. And there was no responsible party on the state. And as you mentioned, yes, when there's a disaster, it's chaotic. It's always going to be. But I think as servants to our constituents, we need to make sure that at the state level, we have a responsible party. And that's what this bill is intended to do. Any questions for Mr. May? All right, seeing none, thank you again, and I plan on working with you in regards to the language.
We as an organization and as a discipline, emergency managers stand ready to support any way we can in getting this stuff.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not showing anybody else with opponent testimony, so if there is anybody, here is your chance. If not, we'll go ahead and move on to neutral testimony, and I do not have any, but if anybody wants to testify in neutral testimony, here's your chance. Seeing none, I'm closing the hearing on House Bill 2468. We do have a few minutes before we need to go on the floor, so I am going to now turn it over to the budget report outs. So Chairman Mason with the Social Services Budget Committee, please tell us the first budget that you're going to be working on this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 3 to report out this morning. I will handle the first 2, and I've asked Representative Ballard to do the one on pharmacy, with your permission. Okay, so the first one we'll look at is the Kansas State Board of Mortuary Arts. The agency submitted a revised estimate of $332,000 roughly in expenditures, all from the Mortuary Arts Fee Fund and 3 FTE positions. Those FTE positions are unchanged. The governor concurred with the estimates for 24, and the committee concurred with the governor's concurrence.
I would say I don't think there's any questions, so just move on to fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for fiscal 25, excuse me, the agency submitted a revised estimate of $334,000, all from the Mortuary Arts Fee Fund, still 3 FTEs. The increase of the revised estimate includes an enhancement request of $9,600 from the Mortuary Arts Fee Fund for the account. It's an increase in expenditure limitations that was inadvertently left out of the legislative pay plan last year, and we'll see this a lot in all of our budgets. You probably all have seen those already. The governor concurred with the agency's revised estimate, and the budget committee concurred with that.
All right, committee, are there any questions in regards to fiscal year 2025? Seeing none, Chairman Mason.
In that case, Mr. Chairman, I would move that I move adoption of the committee report for Board of Mortuary Arts for fiscal year 24-25.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Ballard. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll move on to the Board of Nursing. And the agency submitted a revised estimate of $4.3 million, all from special revenue funds, and 27 FTE positions. That's unchanged. It's an increase of $225,000 for the year, and the increase is due to the agency receiving $225,000 in federal funds through the American Rescue Plan to help with costs of upgrading licensing software. The governor concurred with that revised request, and the budget committee concurred.
Committee, any questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? Seeing none, move on to fiscal year 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agency requested $4.0 million, all from special revenue funds and expenditures, 27 FTE positions. That is unchanged. It's an increase of $66,000. And that, again, is, that was for the state employee pay increases that were authorized by the 2023 legislature. The governor concurred with the agency's revised estimate, and the budget committee concurred.
Committee, any questions in regards to fiscal year 2025? Seeing none. Oh, Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Was there discussion regarding the increased expenditures out of their fee fund? I see some talk of it, but not a great deal of detail there. When we get to 24-25, the fee fund expenditures, we've gone from 2.5 to pushing 4 million. So I was just a little curious as to what made up that increased spending.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? Clarify it for me.
Representative Sutton.
I'm looking at the Board of Nursing fee on page 4 right here. I'm looking at the Board of Nursing Fee Fund expenditures 2016 to 2025. It's particularly the pale line on the right side that I see going up. Was there any discussion about that? That's a pretty significant increase in spending.
Chairman Mason.
Yes, that had to do with mostly the governor's request, did it not? I believe that's what you're referring to.
I don't know the answer. That's what I was asking about, yeah.
Okay.
And then they also have a 3-year IT program that they're spending money on right now.
Yeah. So in the governor's request, of course, there's has to do with the 5% increase for the pay plan, which we will probably address universally as a body. And then there's a 3-year plan for IT improvements.
Didn't they receive ARPA funding for those IT improvements? I thought I saw that on one of the pages. Yeah. The increase is due to the agency receiving $225,000 in federal funds for the ARPA, from ARPA. So the federal funds went into the nursing fee fund?
They augmented them. If you look at page 2 and you look at the budget highlights, you can see that $225,000 is tacked on there as federal funds.
Okay, very good. I see it now. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other further questions for Chairman Mason in regards to fiscal year 2025? Seeing none, Chairman Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move adoption of the Board of Nursing budget for fiscal years 24 and 25.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Representative Ballard. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Chairman Mason.
At this point, with your permission, I'll turn over to Representative Ballard.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agency requests a revised estimate of $4.3 million, all from special revenue funds in expenditure, and 19 FTE positions for 24. This is a decrease of $2,048 below the FY24 approved amount. The decrease is attributable to a decrease in expected expenditures for attorney fees, computer maintenance, and services. In addition, the FY24 approved amount included funds for a new passenger vehicle that are no longer needed in 24. These decreases were partially offset by an increase in the salary and wages expenditures to bring the salaries of pharmacists employed in the agency's investigation program closer to the national average. The agency's 24 revised estimate has no change in FTE positions. The governor concurred with the agency's request for 24, and the Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendation in 24.
Committee, any questions in regards to fiscal year 2024? All right, seeing none, you move on to 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agency requests a revised estimate of $4.1 million, all from special revenue funds in expenditures, and it's a 20 FTE position for FY25. This is an all funds increase of $228,867 above the FY25 approved amount, but a decrease of $261,941 for the 24 revised estimate. The increase is primarily attributed to the agency's enhanced request for funds to continue to pay increase implemented by the 23 Legislature of $74,739, a new FTE position in the compliance division, and that position is actually the assistant director for the compliance division because of the increased caseload that they have. And also they asked for $500 agency hospitality fund. The governor recommends the expenditure of $4.1 million, all from special revenue funds for 25. This is a decrease of $500 below the agency's revised request due to the governor's not recommending the increase of the $500 for hospitality expenditures. The Budget Committee concurs with the governor's recommendations, and also the agency agreed.
All right, committee, any questions in regards to fiscal year 2025? Representative Owens.
Thank you, Chairman Waymaster. So the governor doesn't support $500 in hospitality expenditures, but does support $151,000 for a new FTE. Can you tell me, are there any vacancies currently at the Kansas Board of Pharmacy?
Representative Ballard.
No, there are not.
Oh,
Chairman
I think
Mason.
to your right, maybe.
Yes, and I, at the risk of contradicting, we did ask on that day of the hearing, and she said, the conferee said that there was one vacancy, so they only have 18 employed at this point.
I may comment on it. They have interviewed, they're in the process of advertising that position and everything else. That's why I was thinking there wasn't one, because they're in the process of hiring for that position.
Representative Owens.
Thank you. But it still appears they're able to get their job done with one person short as it is, and have still been functioning in that. So to add another spot for $150,000 for a compliance officer when you already have a vacancy and are still fulfilling the requirements doesn't seem like, to me at least, that makes sense. And so I would then make a motion to remove that FTE position as well as the $151,715 that would be appropriated for that position.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Turk. Discussion on the motion. Representative Ballard.
I would oppose that motion, and part of it is they made their case for why they needed to have assistant position, and part of it is they have increased in the last 10 years the caseloads that they've been receiving. Also, the compliance officers have to meet with all the different pharmacies, which we have over 6,500 pharmacies, and they have to look into the compliance aspect of it. And the individual pharmacies and everything else, and they have been operating without any assistance to the Director of Compliance. And with this, they're hoping that it will lessen the load on the inspectors that have to go out to all of these different pharmacies, as well as they also have some out-of-state business because of a new act that was passed in Congress that they're able to also deal with those. And what they feel, if they do that, they can take less of load off the inspectors, which are overworked at this time. They have never had that assistant position. And with the increase in their caseloads, they could be more efficient, do it in an efficient manner, and would take less load off of the director, which could spend more time with training and also in other aspects. So they made a case for why they should have it, but have never had it, and the increased load over a 10-year period of time.
Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was one of the reasons I asked on that day if they had any vacancies. I was wondering to myself if they couldn't fill this position with existing resources. And one of my concerns, if the committee would look at page 4 and you look at their ending balances, those are dropping precipitously. So you're looking at the change from fiscal 24 to 25. They go from roughly 2 million to about 429,000. And if you look then at page 5, they do have some wiggle room on their licensing fees. They're not near statutory caps on a lot of things, but you know, maybe if we did accept Representative Owen's motion, then we could forestall any increase in licensing fees. That's just my thought.
Representative Landwehr.
So you say they're dropping. Why are they dropping?
Chairman Mason.
There is.
Well, again, if you look at the expenses there on page 4, you know, expenses as opposed to revenues, the expenses are outpacing the revenues by a good distance.
Representative Landwehr. Any further discussion on the motion? Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I don't want to, I'm not really wading in on the motion itself, but that last little exchange definitely regarding the dropping of the fee fund, I think we have to keep in mind that for 24 and 25, the amount that they are normally backfilled from grants isn't included because they haven't actually received those grants yet. They receive them every year, which flattens that expenditure line tremendously, and you don't see that giant increase in spending. So the drop in 24 and 25 isn't as precipitous as it looks on our spreadsheet.
Representative
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ballard.
I would just comment further on it. That's what I wanted to do. Those 2 grants, as you know, they have always applied for grants. The 2 grants are in 2023. They do not have that money yet. They anticipate, I mean, they have been approved, but what they're trying to do at this point is backfill those positions with fee funds until the grants come in. And so in many ways, I think that's a wash.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So they have multiple compliance officers, and then they have a compliance head head of all those. So this position would basically just be another level of bureaucracy between those compliance officers and the chief of the compliance officers?
All right, part of their load, if we look at it, they have 8,200 pharmacists, they have 78 pharmacy technicians, 900 physician interns and students, and nearly 6,500 pharmacies and facilities in that. So what they're talking about, this position, because of the caseloads that they have, that they need this assistant to take part of that responsibilities of lessening the load on them. And I think they've never had it, as I said before, and it's over a 10-year period of time that it has grown. And I thought when we listened to them, and obviously the rest of the committee did, that it warranted having an assistant to share that load, and that would free the director to do some of the other things that he was filling in and lessen the load on the inspectors. And they are the crucial ones out there investigating all the cases and doing the things that they want with compliance.
I appreciate that. I think I would be more inclined to support adding the position if it was another inspector, but not another level of bureaucracy. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative Owens, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I completely understand workload, I to some extent even understand pharmacies, because my neighbor is our local pharmacist in Heston, Kansas, and I'm incredibly grateful for the work that she does for our community in mind. However, I have significant concerns about the continued growth of these agencies. We can always find reasons and needs to lessen somebody else's burden and to spend more money and to grow government. We know that we are already the third highest per capita for the number of public employees in the nation. We have enough employees. I see, based on what I am seeing and hearing here, and I don't sit on your subcommittee, and so we're always respect and appreciate the work that you do. That we can do better. We've been able to manage this far, and we'll just go with, I close on my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it.
Division on that, please.
Division has been called. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. I had six. Motion fails on a vote from 11 to 6. We're back on the budget for fiscal year 2025. Oh, passes, sorry. Passes. Motion passes on a vote 11 to 6. Representative Alcala.
Could you please record my vote, sir?
Representative Alcala would like to have his no vote recorded. Any further discussion on fiscal year 2025? And Representative Ballard would like to have her vote recorded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Board of Pharmacy 24-25, I move the motion.
As amended.
As amended.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Chairman Mason. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, committee, that concludes all of the items that we have today. We do have committee tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You will also see on your desk that we have reports distributed to the committee for the Kansas Long-Term Care Ombudsman, Southwest Kansas Groundwater Management District 3, and Southwest Groundwater Management District checks detail. So until tomorrow,